Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. In Afghanistan, the Interior Ministry says 40 people have been killed and over 50 wounded in multiple blasts outside a school in Kabul, but it did not specify the cause or the target of the explosions. In a statement, the Taliban condemned the blasts and blamed terrorist groups such as ISIS for the attack. Israel is bracing for more protests following a night of violence at Al-Aqsa Mosque that left more than 200 Palestinians wounded. Israeli police fired rubber bullets and stun grenades towards Palestinians protesting forced eviction by Israel in occupied East Jerusalem. The call for fresh protests came from an advocacy groups for Arab Israelis. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have renewed the pledge to enhance cooperation in different fields. The reaffirmation to boost ties came during Prime Minister Imran Khan's meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Jeddah. The Prime Minister and the Crown Prince signed the agreement on establishment of the Saudi-Pakistan Supreme Coordination Council. Moreover, relevant ministers from both sides signed multiple pacts to enhance cooperation in energy, media, prisoners exchange and other areas. Pakistan has received its first shipment of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine through the UN-led COVAX facility. A 10-day lockdown to contain the spread of the pandemic has taken effect as the country's overall death toll reaches 18,797. Meanwhile, India has reported nearly 4,200 fatalities, its highest single-day deaths since the pandemic began. Globally, there are over 3.2 million deaths and nearly 157 million infections. And in cricket, Zimbabwe ended the second day of the first test match against Pakistan at 52 for the loss of 4 wickets in Harare. They are now trailing by 458 runs after Pakistan declared their first innings at 510 for 8, with Abid Ali scoring a maiden double century. Pakistan are leading the two-match series 1-0. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Afghanistan, the Interior Ministry says 40 people have been killed and over 50 wounded in multiple blasts outside a school in Kabul, but it did not specify the cause or the target of the explosions. In a statement, the Taliban condemned the blasts and blamed terrorist groups such as ISIS for the attack.
Violence comes as fighting between the Taliban and government forces rages across the country following a missed US deadline for troops withdrawal. Responding, the Taliban suspended their participation in a key meeting on the peace process in Istanbul. The special US envoy Zalmi Khalilzad has said Washington will back the Afghan government if the Taliban reject peace efforts. But the Taliban insist that the names of their leaders should be removed from a UN blacklist for the success of peace negotiations. The group has also clarified that it's not aiming for a military takeover following the withdrawal of troops by the 11th of September as announced by the United States.
Israel is bracing for more protests following a night of violence at Al-Aqsa Mosque that left more than 200 Palestinians wounded. Israeli police fired rubber bullets and stun grenades towards Palestinians protesting forced eviction by Israel in occupied East Jerusalem. The call for fresh protests came from an advocacy group for Arab Israelis. The Friday attack by Israeli forces comes after tensions soared in recent weeks over restrictions on access to parts of the old city and the threat of eviction. An Israeli court is due to give a ruling on plans to force Palestinians out of their homes in the East Jerusalem's neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah on Monday. Major global and regional powers have urged Israel to halt its expansionist policies. On Friday, the UN Human Rights Office said forced evictions can amount to war crimes. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have renewed their pledge to enhance cooperation in different fields. The reaffirmation to boost ties came during Prime Minister Imran Khan's meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Jeddah. The leaders spoke on the issues of common interest at regional and international level. The Prime Minister and the Crown Prince signed the agreement on establishment of the Saudi-Pakistan Supreme Coordination Council. Meanwhile, relevant ministers from the two sides signed multiple pacts to enhance cooperation in several areas, including energy, media, and prisoners exchange. Prime Minister Imran Khan, along with a high-level delegation, is on a three-day visit to Saudi Arabia at the invitation of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Pakistan has urged the United Nations to ask the Indian government to release all illegally held Kashmiri prisoners. Pakistan's representative to the UN, Munir Akram, wrote a letter to Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He conveyed Pakistan's deep concern to Guterres over the death of a Kashmiri leader in Indian custody. Akram said a leader, Ashraf Sarai, spent his life struggling for the legitimate right to self-determination of Kashmiris. The envoy called for the release of prisoners in view of the worsening COVID-19 situation in India. Pakistan says it is concerned over reports about the seizure of more than 7 kilograms of uranium by unauthorized persons in India. In a statement, Foreign Office spokesperson said the security of nuclear materials should be the top priority for all countries. Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said there is a need for thorough investigation of how such a quantity of uranium can be available outside any state control. This is the second time in India that such a highly radioactive substance has been seized by police in recent years. Pakistan has received its first shipment of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX facility. The National Command and Operations Center says additional consignment of over 1 million vaccines will arrive in a few days. Pakistan has reported 120 fatalities from coronavirus in the last 24 hours. The death toll is approaching 18,800. The Health Ministry says over 4,100 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The country has reported 854,000 infections since the pandemic began. India has once again registered its record COVID-19 deaths as nearly 4,200 people have lost their lives overnight. The country has also reported more than 400,000 cases for the third consecutive day. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.2 million lives and has infected over 156 million people. More in this report.
As India's coronavirus catastrophe worsens, now the country's rural fragile healthcare system is being overwhelmed too. Rundown local hospitals and health centers are unable to cope with a crisis that they were never equipped for. Country's traders have converted school buses into Oxygen Express for COVID-19 patients. India's main opposition leader, Rahul Gandhi, has warned the uncontrollable wave would devastate not only India, but also the rest of the world. The new waves of the outbreak are fast engulfing a growing number of nations across South and Southeast Asia. The World Health Organization said the region reported a 19% increase in cases and a whopping 48% increase in deaths this week.
And some countries now are at such a rate of infection that their health systems are back under severe pressure. We've seen the tragedy in India. We need to avoid that same tragedy occurring in other countries, and some other countries are heading in that direction. And we need to take action. We need to take the heat out. This pandemic is global, but this pandemic is acting very differently in different countries.
The WHO also approved a COVID-19 vaccine from China's state-owned drug maker, Sinopharm, for emergency use. It said tens of millions of asylum seekers, refugees and internally displaced people globally have been excluded from vaccination programs. This comes as many world powers voiced their opposition against the US proposal to waive the intellectual property rights for vaccines. France's Emmanuel Macron echoed the German government's concerns, over Joe Biden's proposed suspensions of the rights. EU leaders are divided over supporting the patent waiver and will discuss the idea at the two-day Porto summit.
I think the important thing is to keep the target ahead of us. We need many more vaccines, even though Europe is producing to the world. I think 200 million doses are delivered to Europe, 180 million doses are delivered out of Europe. The need is still enormous, and I think that is what needs to be in focus.
England has put 12 destinations on its green list for trips. Anyone returning from those countries will not need to quarantine from 17th May. Meanwhile, the US CDC now says the airborne virus can be inhaled even when one is more than 6 feet away from an infected individual.
The Saudi-led military coalition says it has destroyed another explosive-laden drone launched by the Houthi rebels in Yemen. In a statement, the coalition said the drone was targeting civilian areas in the kingdom's Khamis Mushayt region. The attack comes a day after the US said Houthis missed a chance to show commitment to peace by refusing to meet with the UN Special Envoy. A US State Department said there is a fair deal on the table that will bring immediate relief to the people of Yemen. Washington also slammed the rebels for worsening Yemen's humanitarian crisis by continuing to attack Marib. The oil-rich governorate is the last northern stronghold of Yemeni government that the Houthis aim to seize. The US says a drone has targeted Iraq's Ain al-Assad air base, which houses American and other foreign forces. In a tweet, US Army spokesperson Colonel Wayne Maroto said the attack caused damage to a hangar. He added no injuries were reported while the incident is being investigated. Colonel Maroto said such attacks against the coalition forces undermine the rule of law and Iraq's sovereignty. No group has yet claimed the responsibility for the attack. Iran says the US has expressed readiness to lift a great part of sanctions on Tehran at the Vienna nuclear deal revival talks. Iran's top nuclear negotiator Abbas Araghchi said though this is not adequate, the talks will continue till Tehran's all demands are met. He added that Iran is quite serious about returning to its commitments under the deal. Noting progress in the fourth round of talks in Vienna, Araghchi said the US and all sides are serious about reviving the deal. However, White House spokesperson Jen Psaki said sanctions could only be lifted if Iran comes back into compliance with the 2015 deal. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The United States says it will join a New Zealand-led global campaign against online extremism. The decision marked a change in policy 2 years after the former US administration declined to participate. The White House said countering the use of the internet by terrorists to radicalize and recruit is a significant US priority. In a statement, spokesperson Jen Psaki said the US's move to join the coalition reinforces the need for collective action. She added Washington will participate in a virtual summit on 14th of May. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has welcomed the US move, saying it is a commitment to work more closely. Ardern initiated the campaign after a gunman killed 51 people at a mosque in Christchurch in 2019. In the US, 4 former Minneapolis police officers have been indicted on civil rights charges in the killing of George Floyd. The charges are the latest sign that the new US administration is taking a harder line against police abuses. A federal grand jury issued a 3-count indictment charging 4 former officers, including Derek Chauvin. The indictment accuses them of violating Floyd's constitutional rights, including his right to medical aid. It says they saw Floyd lying on the ground in clear need of medical care and willfully failed to aid him. However, 3 officers were released on $25,000 bonds while Chauvin remains in custody. Meanwhile, the White House says the indictment is a reminder of the need to put police reform in place. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko has hit out at a criminal complaint filed against him in a German court. State media attributed these comments to Lukashenko 2 days before the country marked Soviet victory over Nazi Germany. Referring to Germany's Nazi past, Lukashenko said heirs of fascism are in no position to judge him. The president added that if he is on trial, then some other European leaders should also be brought to justice. He recalled the crackdown on yellow vests in France and the events around the US Capitol. Earlier, 4 German lawyers accused Lukashenko of crimes against humanity during the anti-government protests. In Scotland, initial results of the parliamentary elections show the Scottish National Party may fall short in maintaining an overall majority. The shortfall of Nicola Sturgeon's SNP may make it harder to demand a second referendum on independence. The latest results show the party currently has 39 seats, while Liberal Democrats and the Conservative Party have 4 each and Labour Party has 1. The SNP requires a majority of 65 seats to push forward the demand of an independence referendum. Sturgeon had promised to hold the referendum in 2023 in case her party wins a majority in the elections. In 2014, just over 55% of Scots voted against independence from the UK. Bolivia and Chile have agreed to normalize their bilateral relations. The agreement does not cover landlocked Bolivia's disputed claims to ocean access. A committee will be set up to oversee matters including the cross-border movement of goods, environment and tourism. Speaking at a conference in La Paz, Bolivian Foreign Minister Rogelio Maita said the two countries have been exploring several initiatives of a reciprocal interest. Maita said both sides agreed to advance on a roadmap for 2021 that will be developed bilaterally.
Both countries agree that constructive dialogue is the ideal instrument for understanding and integration, for bilateral cooperation to effectively help in creating a peaceful coexistence, an intercultural dialogue that contributes to the necessary understanding of peoples, and that trade and investment are tools to achieve economic and social progress in our countries.
In Chile, security forces clashed with demonstrators who were protesting against a military takeover that followed the death of President Idris Deby last month. The transitional military government had earlier banned the protest called by some opposition parties. A group of protesters defied the measures and took to the streets waving flags. The military has promised to organize elections within 18 months, but some opposition parties have rejected the transitional government and termed it a coup. They want the transitional government to be led by a civilian. Debris from a large Chinese rocket is expected to plunge back through the atmosphere this weekend. The Chinese Foreign Ministry says most of the debris will be burnt out on re-entry and poses no harm to Earth. The Long March 5B rocket blasted off from China's Hainan Island on April the 29th. It carried the unmanned Tianhe module, which contains living quarters for crew members of a new Chinese space station. Earlier, the US military said it was tracking what it called an uncontrollable re-entry. The US Space Command said the location of the rocket's descent cannot be pinpointed yet. The junk is expected to land on Earth on 8th of May. The largest diamond ever cut in Russia is set to be auctioned at Christie's in Geneva on 12th of May. A 100.94 carat stone is called the Alderosa Spectacle. The diamond can be sold for nearly $20 million. A jewelry specialist said it took 1 year and 8 months to cut this perfect stone. She said the diamond was cut from a stone that originally weighed more than 200 carats. The diamond is one of 144 lots on offer in the sale. The items include rings, earrings, brooches, and other pieces made with diamonds, sapphires, and rubies. In Spain, elderly residents from a nursing home outside Madrid relished the fresh air and freedom of a guided tour around the city's zoo. This report has the details.
Around 50 residents and staff from the Casawadi home were whisked through the zoo's leafy trails on a miniature train. These vaccinated visitors were introduced to some of the park's most charismatic inhabitants. The sight of Bingxing, the giant panda, particularly delighted them. This was their first organized excursion since the COVID-19 pandemic struck last spring.
It's good to leave, to break the monotony of the nursing home, especially as we have been confined there for so long. It's nice to get outside, so I decided to go out and see the world.
Birds were of interest too, as the elders enjoyed an introduction to cockatoo and macaw.
I feel here as if I was in my village many years ago, in the middle of the nature, listening to the birds, which I haven't heard for a long time. So for me, it's a great day. I'm a bit tired, but it is compensated by the pleasure of seeing and hearing what is around us.
Nearly 43,000 elderly people in Spanish nursing homes died of COVID-19 during the first wave of the pandemic. After such a devastating loss, authorities prioritized the vaccination of people who work and live in care homes, achieving nearly total coverage by the end of February.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news.